Hey, fourth graders. Today we get to read a book called La Mariposa, and it's written by Francisco Jimenez, and it's illustrated by Simon Silva. And what you should know before we get started is mariposa means butterfly in Spanish. And I noticed that there's a butterfly here, and the boy in this illustration appears to be flying like a butterfly. I wonder what that has to do with our book. What's the connection to a butterfly here? This is a realistic fiction book, which ties in nicely to what you guys are working on and writing right now. It's a made-up story, but it could have happened, so that makes it realistic fiction. Before we begin, I want you to think about your first day of school in a new grade, maybe in a new school, if you've ever moved and been a new kid at a new school. Think about that, and then think about how much harder it would be if you didn't know the language that everyone was speaking there. All right, let's get started. La Mariposa. Early Monday morning, Francisco got up to get ready. Quickly, he pulled on his overalls, which he hated because he thought the suspenders made him look foolish. But he found the soft, bright flannel shirt Mama had just bought at the Goodwill store. Then he put on his favorite cap. Quítatela en la clase, his older brother Roberto warned him, for he had been to school before and knew it was bad manners to wear a hat in class. What do you think he told him, quítatela en la clase, if he knows it's bad manners to wear a hat in class? Gracias, Francisco told him, taking it off. But after his breakfast and just before heading out, he decided to wear the cap. Papa always wore one, and how could Francisco feel dressed for first grade without it? He would remember to take it off in class. So if you guessed that quítatela en la clase meant take off your hat in class, that's correct. Adios, Mama, Francisco and Roberto called as they headed out to catch the school bus. Adios, hijos, she answered. Que Dios los bendiga. Papa had already left to thin lettuce, the only work he could find in late January. Mama stayed home to take care of little Jose and to set up their new home in Tent City. When the school bus arrived, Francisco took the window seat next to his brother so that he could watch the rows of lettuce and cauliflower go whizzing by. He thought the furrows looked like giant legs running alongside. The bus kept stopping to pick up kids, and with each stop, the noise inside grew louder. Some kids were yelling at the top of their lungs. Francisco did not know what they were saying because he could speak only Spanish, and they were all speaking English. He was getting a headache. Roberto had his eyes closed and was frowning. Francisco did not disturb him. He figured his brother was getting a headache too. When they got to school, Roberto walked Francisco to the principal's office. Mr. Sims, the principal, was a tall, red-headed man who listened patiently to Roberto. My little brother, Roberto said, using the little English he knew, is in primer grado. What do you think that means? He's in primer grado. That's right, he's in first grade. Mr. Sims walked Francisco to the first grade classroom, and as soon as he saw the bright electric lights, shiny wood floor, and the warm heater in the corner, Francisco liked the room. It was not at all like his family's green army tent with its hard dirt floor. So let's look at that illustration from the previous page again. So you can see that they are living in these tents. Why do you think they might be living in a tent like this? So one of the things that it said on this page is that Papa was working thinning lettuce, and that's one of the jobs that a migrant worker might do. And migrant means that they move around for work. So if they're living in these tents, it means it's probably a temporary place for them to live while someone in their family does work in that area. So what does he think about his new school? It's a little stressful that he doesn't understand the language. He's getting a headache, but he kind of likes the inside of it. He's kind of intrigued by how shiny things are and bright. Mr. Sims introduced Francisco to his teacher, Miss Scalapino, who smiled and repeated his name, Francisco. It was the only word Francisco understood the whole time she and the principal talked. They repeated it each time they glanced at him. After Mr. Sims left, she showed Francisco to his desk at the end of the row of desks set closest to the windows. There were no other kids in the room. Can you imagine being somewhere where two people were talking about you and you didn't know what they were saying? How must that feel? Francisco sat at his desk and ran his hand over its wooden top. It was full of scratches and dark ink spots. He lifted the top, and inside were a box of crayons, a yellow ruler, and a thick pencil. Looking around the room, he saw under the window, right next to his desk, a caterpillar in a large jar. It was yellowish green with black bands, and it moved very slowly, without making any sound. Just as Francisco was about to reach into the jar to gently touch the caterpillar, the bell rang. Kids lined up outside the classroom doorway and then walked in quietly and took their seats. Some of them looked at Francisco and giggled. They made him nervous. He turned his head away from them and looked at the caterpillar in the jar. He did this every time someone looked at him. Miss Scalapino started speaking to the class, and Francisco did not understand a word she said. The more she spoke, the more Francisco wanted to be at home. He tried to pay attention because he wanted to understand. But by the end of the day, he got very tired of hearing Miss Scalapino talk because the sounds still made no sense to him. He got a bad headache, and that night, when he went to bed, he heard her voice in his head. For days, Francisco tried to listen, but he always went home with a bad headache until he learned a way out. When his head began to hurt from trying to understand, he let his mind wander. Sometimes he imagined himself flying out of the classroom and over the fields where Papa worked. So he has these terrible headaches. Can you imagine being at school all day and you can't understand what your teacher's saying? And how hard it must be to work to try to understand, get some meaning out of the words all day. It sounds exhausting. So what's his solution? Well, he's imagining himself, he's daydreaming, imagining himself flying over the fields. Hola, Papa, he would say, landing next to him. But Francisco was careful to not let the teacher catch him thinking about flying. He would look at the teacher and pretend he was listening. Papa had told him it was disrespectful not to pay attention, especially to grown-ups. So he wants to do the right thing, and he wants to follow his papa's instructions, but how difficult to pay attention all day when you don't understand the language. When the teacher spoke the children's names, though, Francisco would listen. He liked their sound. Molly sounded like mole in Spanish, and Pat sounded like pato. The one he learned first was Curtis, because Curtis was the biggest and most popular kid in the class. He was always chosen captain when the kids formed teams. Francisco was the smallest kid in the class, and he did not know English, so he was chosen last. Francisco liked Arthur better. Arthur was one of the boys who knew a little Spanish. During recess, they would play on the swings, and Francisco would pretend to be a Mexican movie star, like Jorge Negrete or Pedro Infante, riding a horse and singing the corridos he heard on the car radio. He taught the songs to Arthur as they swung back and forth, going as high as they could. But if Miss Scalapino heard them speaking Spanish, she would say no with her whole body. Her head turned left and right 100 times a second, and her index finger moved from side to side as fast as a windshield wiper. English! English! She repeated. Arthur avoided Francisco whenever she was around. So do you think that Miss Scalapino is right in scolding them for speaking Spanish? What do you think about that? All right, we're going to stop here and pick back up tomorrow. Do you think things will improve for Francisco at school? What do you think is going to happen with his friendship with Arthur? Do you think Miss Scalapino will continue to scold him when he speaks Spanish? Come back tomorrow and we'll find out.